Hi everyone, and welcome to my final multimedia presentation for this American Christian Heritage course. This presentation will focus on Christianity in early Plymouth colony, but also touches base on how their beliefs might have affected their relationships with the local Native American groups, such as the Wampanoag. This presentation also touches base on how the Pilgrims' lack of understanding of Native religion would make it sometimes impossible for them to better understand various Native individuals who were vital to the progression of the colony. The Pilgrims came to the New World in order to experience true religious freedom, as they disagreed with the inner workings of the Church of England. But in order to make this colony flourish, and in order to really fulfill the dreams that would push these colonists or future colonists to leave Europe, they would need to face challenges that tested them physically and psychologically. On top of this, the colony's religious beliefs would be put to the test on a daily basis. Just within the first few months of being in the New World, the colony would lose half of its population, and we have to ask ourselves, what did morale look like in Plymouth? As Christians, the Pilgrims' faith is what drove them down their path in life. But how did religion really affect the ways in which Plymouth colony functioned? And we have to go even further than this and examine the ways that religion affected the Pilgrims individually and how this religion affected neighboring Native groups such as the Wampanoag or relationships with those groups, and with Native individuals that had called North America home for thousands and thousands of years. Just from first glance, we can see how much religion meant to the Pilgrims because of their ability to endure these incredibly horrendous conditions and still keep success on their minds. I do not believe the Pilgrims' legacy is necessarily one of success because of their desperate need of assistance from Native Americans such as Tisquantum and Massasoit, but the Pilgrims' religious drive is something of a legacy, and in order to fully understand this unique group of European colonists, it's crucial to examine the ways in which religion really was the biggest driver for these Europeans. During the most difficult times of the colonization of the New World, it would be the colonists' belief in God that pushed them to keep grasping for anything that would lead to their survival and to the successful establishment of Plymouth colony. In 1620, when the Pilgrims first arrived in the New World and eventually came upon the former home of the Patuxet natives, they saw it as a blessing from God. From the beginning, the Pilgrims would give thanks to God for all of their victories. The Pilgrims even believed that the arrival of Squanto in their colony was a gift from God. The attribution of small and large victories to God truly shows their commitment to their religion. Even outside of the Pilgrims, many colonists, European colonists from the time period and region, felt that God had deemed it their mission to colonize North America. We can even see the Pilgrims' commitment to God by reading the first document they would essentially create together, the Mayflower Compact. Within the document, the colonists claimed that this journey was taken specifically for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, as well as for the honor of our king and country. The fact that these colonists listed their religion before their king tells us a lot about where their priorities lie. Skipping ahead a little to after when the Pilgrims left the Mayflower and began to actually construct the colony, we can see more writings that support the Pilgrims' faith in their God and religion. Within of Plymouth Plantation, William Bradford again writes that this specific mission was carried out in order to glorify God and to advance the Christian faith. Bradford also describes the starving times, which would be an important time in the colony and would determine whether the New World would make or break these colonists. Within the first few months, half of the Pilgrims would be dead again, which in turn put their faith in God to the test. During this time, there would only be 6 or 7 individuals who were able to care for everyone. They clothed, fed, and helped the rest of the group survive past the early times in the colony. However, there were some that Bradford described as not being willing to help the rest of the colonists during this period of time. Bradford explained that these individuals would eventually have to recompense with the Lord. Religion would weigh in on every decision and action made within the colony. From sunrise until sunset, these individuals used their belief in God as a driving force to lead them to survival in this new land that they now called home. One misconception about the Pilgrims, and more specifically about Thanksgiving, that I want to touch base on briefly is that, interestingly enough, when Edward Winslow describes the first so-called Thanksgiving, he never once discusses that the colonists and himself were giving thanks. Obviously, these colonists thanked God every day for what they had accomplished, but what most individuals view as the first Thanksgiving was actually just an observance of the end of harvest, which was common in England and was actually known more of as a secular celebration where drinking, dancing, and general merrymaking would occur. Sometimes the celebration would even take place before the harvest actually took place as well. James Dietz would not find this information about this gathering sufficient enough to call the event the first Thanksgiving, and I would have to agree with this. The celebration the Pilgrims put on at that time was merely a celebration of their many accomplishments since arriving in the New World, and of their survival in general. They made it past the starving times and were trying to move on to bigger and better things in terms of the colony's progression. Still though, God was always on the mind of the Pilgrims as they faced new dangers and challenges on a daily basis, and it would truly be the assistance of Native Americans that made the survival and progression of the colonists possible in general. We can never forget to focus on the contributions of Native Americans when studying this topic, because without them it's likely Plymouth Colony would have had a similar fate to Jamestown, which eventually failed. William Bradford would call Squanto a special instrument of God for their good beyond their expectation. However, there were also times when Squanto threatened the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag. At a later time, Bradford would almost change his tone in saying that Squanto sought his own ends and played his own games to enrich himself. While it is true that Squanto did at times jeopardize this incredibly important relationship between colonists and natives, much more information must be understood before many judgments can be made about Squanto. The fact that Squanto was kidnapped and taken to Europe for years would come into play when looking at his motives when he was able to return to North America. One interesting aspect of Plymouth Colony to consider is that while Christianity did dictate everyday life for these colonists, a lack of understanding of Native American religion would hinder the colonists' ability to truly understand why a lot of these native individuals, such as Squanto or another individual named Hobbamock, did what they did or operated in the way that they did. These Europeans did not understand the more complex aspects of native life, such as their oral traditions, mythology, and, as I just stated, their religion. This is a more abstract way of seeing how the Pilgrims' dedication to their religion would at times make it difficult for them to understand the different groups of natives that surrounded them. However, through thick and thin, these Plymouth colonists never allowed their focus to drift from their mission and what motivated that mission, their belief in God. It's interesting to ask ourselves, though, how much more understanding more about native culture could have benefited the colonists before coming to the New World. Shamanism was likely one of the most difficult things for these colonists or European colonists to understand in general, because unlike Christianity, shamanism wasn't necessarily associated with a religion. It was more complex than that, and Europeans wouldn't really know of anything to compare it to. One last thing that I think is important to discuss is how the Pilgrims would generally fail at spreading their own religion to the natives. It's important to mention this because it connects with the Pilgrims' lack of understanding for native culture and religion, as well as shamanism. One incredible quote from an article entitled Indian Devils and Pilgrim Fathers, Squanto Habamak, and the English Conception of Indian Religion states that the Pilgrims' failure to recognize the Indian religion as the product of a fundamentally different organization of consciousness, of a whole different way of seeing the world, doomed their effects to civilize and Christianize the natives. And while Native Americans didn't need to necessarily be civilized by anyone, the Pilgrims' fundamental misunderstandings of native religion and culture would be the biggest thing that stood between them and their mission of spreading Christianity. Thank you so much for taking the time to view my presentation, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.